This video is brought to you by Squarespace, the all-in-one website building platform to bring your business to life and succeed online, all in one place and all on your terms. The name of William Utermohlen is often not well known outside of the art world, but for those familiar with his work, most often they will instantly think of many self-portraits he created towards the end of his life that detail quite a heartbreaking aspect of life that many of us experience firsthand at some stage. Utermohlen embarked on a remarkable artistic journey that offered a profound glimpse into the depths of the human mind and the relentless grip of Alzheimer's disease. As the disease gradually eroded his cognitive abilities, Utermohlen turned to his art, specifically self-portraits, to chronicler his deteriorating self-perception and the disintegration of his identity. To this day, Utermohlen's self-portraits stand as a poignant testament to the human spirit's resilience in the face of devastating adversity. His paintings, spanning from the early stages of his diagnosis in 1995 to his final works in the year 2000, offer a raw and intimate portrayal of the artist's struggle to maintain a sense of self as his cognitive abilities slipped away. In his earlier self-portraits, Utermohlen's features remain recognizable, albeit imbued with a sense of growing anxiety and confusion. But over time, his brushstrokes become increasingly fragmented, reflecting the fragmentation of his own perception. By the end, his self-portraits had transformed into abstract expressions of fear, isolation, and despair. In this video, we will be taking that same journey together to see how Utermohlen's final self-portraits transcend the realm of mere artistic expression and how they serve as a powerful visual narrative of a human experience within the confines of Alzheimer's disease. This is the story of the final self-portraits of William Utermohlen. William Charles Utermohlen was born in South Philadelphia, USA in 1933. Utermohlen displayed an early aptitude for art, earning a scholarship to the prestigious Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts in 1951. After serving in the military, he embarked on a study tour of Europe, immersing himself in the works of Renaissance masters. In 1962, he settled in London, where he found both artistic inspiration and personal fulfillment, marrying the art historian Patricia Redmond in 1965. Utermohlen's artistic career was marked by a consistent focus on figurative painting, particularly portraiture. His early works were characterized by a realistic style, capturing the essence of his subjects with a keen eye for detail and a subtle understanding of human expression. However, in the mid-1970s, his artistic style began to evolve, reflecting a growing interest in abstraction and a more personal exploration of identity and memory. By 1991, Utermohlen began to experience the first signs of cognitive decline. 4 years later, he received a diagnosis of probable Alzheimer's disease, a diagnosis that would profoundly shape his artistic output. Rather than retreating from his art, Utermohlen turned to it as a means of understanding and expressing his deteriorating self-expression. From 1995 onwards, Utermohlen embarked on a series of self-portraits that became his most recognizable and celebrated work. The self-portraits, spanning from the early stages of his diagnosis to his final work completed in the year 2000, offer a raw and intimate portrayal of the artist's struggle to maintain a sense of self as his cognitive abilities failed. Utermohlen's self-portraits are characterized by their honesty and emotional intensity. But despite the physical and cognitive challenges he faced, Utermohlen continued to paint with remarkable determination and focus. His self-portraits became a lifeline, a means of connecting with the inner world and expressing the emotions that words could no longer convey. By the time Utermohlen began working on his conversation series between 1989 and 1991, the first signs of his memory loss were beginning to surface. In fact, the series of paintings was even described by the French psychoanalyst Patrice Polloni as Utermohlen's attempt to detail the events of his life before memory loss. His symptoms ranged from being unable to remember how to wrap his necktie to being unable to find his way back to his apartment. Sure enough, in August 1995, at the age of 61, he was diagnosed with probable Alzheimer's disease and was admitted to the Queen's Square Hospital, where a health professional named Ron Isaacs became interested in his drawings and asked him to start drawing self-portraits. Utermohlen's self-portraits from this period offer a remarkable visual chronicle of the artist's deteriorating self-perception and the gradual disintegration of his identity. Even one of his very first self-portraits during this period, completed just after his diagnosis, named Blue Skies, was showing very subtle signs of his increasing anxieties and loss of self. He portrays himself as a solitary figure, clutching a table for support in an empty, featureless room. The skylight above him offers no solace as it opens onto a cold, dark void. It's widely documented that this self-portrait captures Utermohlen's reaction to his diagnosis and the weight of this reality hitting him. Utermohlen's use of colour and form is particularly striking. The mustard yellow background is both warm and oppressive, while the blue of the sky is deep, cold and foreboding. Utermohlen's figure is rendered in a rough, simplified style, as if he is struggling to grasp his own form. His left hand is tightly clenching the table, suggesting, as even his own neuropsychologist had theorized when first viewing this piece, a desperate need to hold on to something familiar, as the world around him is constantly in a relentless flux of change. Between 1995 and 1996, as the disease progressed, Utermohlen's self-portraits, now a crucial outlet for his psychological self-expression, were becoming increasingly more abstract, incomplete, and unhinged. To emphasize just how much he was beginning to feel the familiar world slip away from him, he began to remove or cover the mirrors in his own home, unable to recognize his reflection more and more as the days went by. But what he did see seemed to terrify him, and so he gradually started to stop using them to create his self-portraits. This may be another reason why his face gets increasingly distorted and features experimental uses of colour, or sometimes no colour at all. A series of 6 works known as the Masks that would be produced within the year 1966 also greatly indicate the absence of a mirror and the desire to represent a more abstract interpretation of the self that was continuing to slip away. His mask painting titled Clown shows eyes wide with fear and 2 white marks on the cheeks next to a red slit for a mouth, giving the impression that the clown is crying. The head is also surrounded by darkness, with what almost looks like the top half of a clown's skull being separated and lifted away from his head. This piece, titled Self-Portrait in the Studio, completed that same year, captures a moment of fear, frustration, and profound introspective self-awareness as Utermohlen grapples with the implications of his deteriorating cognitive abilities. His features are fragmented, disproportionate, and hastily painted over, suggesting the disintegration of his physical and mental self. The jarring juxtaposition of thick, vibrant paint over the delicate underdrawing and sketch of his face and body further accentuates the artist's inner turmoil and confusion. But more crucially, there is a real sense of exasperation that arises from this work. He presents himself in the studio, a place where he felt he truly belonged and where he used to be able to express himself skillfully and beautifully. But as the disease started to hinder his abilities as the years went by, the studio became a place of disorder and bitter hopelessness. Without any real means to accurately illustrate himself like he normally would, he gives in and takes out his frustration on the work with these crude, thick layers of paint. In other words, the split between what he feels, what he would like to do or say, and what he is actually capable of doing is widening each day, rendering his methods of expression to be no longer adequate to express the extreme nature of his experience. Another self-portrait that illustrates this feeling is his piece titled Self-Portrait with Easel, which shows the easel almost intertwined with Utermohlen's yellow-skinned head and shoulders, as if the easel has imprisoned him or locked him behind it. This drawing, simply titled Broken Figure, another piece completed in 1996, again expresses his own decline, this time with a broken and dislocated body. The faint, ghostly figure on the right is like a drawn contour of a fallen body, like a part of his life that is now no more. His red self-portrait is one of the most haunting works from this particular year. Here it seems Utermohlen is watching himself disappear. His look is empty of all hope. His eyes are sunken and his face is almost completely immersed into the darkness behind him. Perhaps in this work he dared to look into the mirror once again, but his reflection is coming apart and he can't put himself back together. He can't help but sense that the mirror is sending back a negative, a death-carrying image that he had hoped to overcome. From 1997 onwards, more interesting symbolism seems to emerge, such as the enlargement of his ears, widely believed to represent his gradual loss of hearing. In his piece titled Self-Portrait with Saw, he includes the symbolism of a carpenter's saw on the right-hand side. This is believed to be a representation of a new anxiety that haunted him during this year, when his doctors informed him that an autopsy would have given a definite diagnosis of his condition. The way the saw blade is positioned vertically is not too dissimilar to that of a guillotine, representing an impending prefigured death, and perhaps also the inevitability of the death of his sense of self. In addition to trying to grasp onto his memory of himself, it seems he must also continue to recognize his wife Patricia, as evident in this piece. Patricia once had been the focal point of his previous works, and at this stage of his disease, he fully depends on her for all of his daily needs. This would be the last portrait of her that Utermohlen would make. Despite his technique simplifying more significantly as the months go by, it's quite amazing how expressive his self-portraits continue to be, even as his disease advances, which seems to be quite clear in his two yellow and green self-portraits. Although his forms are more blurred, and his motivation, memory, and visual recognition are now noticeably more disorganized, the expression of sadness, anxiety, resignation, and the feeling of feebleness on his face, nevertheless, is still crystal clear. If his experience of time is now nothing but a disjointed sequence of superimposed moments, it is possible that by now, he is layering each of these moments over his face one at a time, creating these strange tangled messes of colours and lines, letting none of the fleeting moments pass without being captured on canvas. In 1998, we'd be presented with a really touching moment of Utermohlen longing to experience the old motions of painting once again by looking at himself in the mirror one last time, using the pose of the oldest self-portrait he's kept since 1955 when he was 22 years old. As explained in the catalogue produced in conjunction with the exhibition entitled The Later Works of William Utermohlen, which was held at the New York Academy of Medicine in October 2006, quote, "Back then, he already had that open gaze onto the world, that same perplexed, anxious, questioning note in facing himself and his future." In the 1998 self-portrait, the architecture of his psyche has changed. His head is tightly framed by the rectangle of his easel. The red and yellow lines narrow to constrict his head and serve to disconnect this last portrayal of self. It will soon become impossible for Bill to sign his name at the bottom of a canvas. Very soon, he will stop recognizing his name altogether. End quote. 5 years after William Utermohlen's diagnosis, time had become no more than a sequence of instants. In his 1999 piece, the head is drawn and erased at the same time, earning the title, Erased Self-Portrait, the last piece of art that he would attempt using a paintbrush. Believe it or not, this work took nearly 2 years for him to complete, indicating that this empty void for a head and face of Utermohlen never remained consistent for one moment each time he returned to it. With the layers of paint removed and painted over and removed again, it truly does express an ego that appears and disappears constantly. The ever-changing concentration and fluctuating state of mind must have been unbearably challenging for him. His very last piece, a drawing simply titled Head, was completed in the year 2000. One last time, we're presented with a face that truly no longer recognizes itself. A face with 2 small beady eyes, a smudge for an ear, and what seems to be a face that's cracked in 2, whether intentionally or not, symbolizing the body and mind splitting apart from each other. It appears that Utermohlen can only bring himself to illustrate a primal image of a human being, but what emerges is foreign and threatening to the artist. Nothing more than a stranger that shares his body, adding yet another cold aspect of a dark crack running down his face. A face split in 2, a face shared between the artist and a mysterious entity. By December 2000, William Utermohlen retired from painting, and by 2002, he could no longer draw at all. In 2004, he was admitted to full-time care at the Princess Louise nursing home, and by 2007, Utermohlen passed away at the age of 73, leaving his remarkable legacy behind. Scientists, health experts, and neurologists around the world have viewed Utermohlen's last self-portraits as a valuable way to observe the progressive states of dementia and how they may offer many ways to better understand and combat the condition for future generations. It shows how art can not only be seen as merely an aesthetically pleasing world of wall decorations, but also as a means for us to express what can't be explained through words alone. It's amazing how powerful an image or a piece of music can be to perfectly explain the unexplainable, and offer health specialists extra tools to improve the welfare for future patients. But at the same time, Utermohlen's self-portraits are not just a personal testament to his struggle with Alzheimer's, they are also a universal narrative about the human condition. His paintings speak to the fears and anxieties that we all share, the fear of losing our memories, our sense of self, and the connections that bind us to others. Through his art, Utermohlen has transformed his personal tragedy into a powerful statement about the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video. Now that we're swiftly approaching a new year, if you're an artist watching, it may be a good idea to start the new year off right by getting your artwork out in the world with a slick new website, which is certainly something Squarespace can help you with. If you're still looking for a professional way to present your artwork online, you can get started using Squarespace's professional portfolio designs. You can display your projects in customizable galleries and, if you want to, add password-protected pages to share private work with clients. That goes for virtually any kind of projects you may have. Whether you sell physical or digital art, Squarespace has all the tools you need to start setting up a polished online store. And you don't even have to be an expert in web design either, as Squarespace offers an extremely wide catalogue of templates that you can customize and edit to fit the exact aesthetic you want to express yourself with. And Squarespace won't leave you empty-handed if you want to get started right now. Just click the link in my description below and use the code on screen to get 10% off your first purchase and start your online presence in the best way possible. Thank you again to Squarespace for sponsoring today's video, and of course, thank you to you for watching. Before I go, it's time for my end of video segment called Artist Corner, where I get to share some artwork sent in by one of my viewers, and today's featured artist is Adam Yates. Adam has been drawing since he could first consciously remember doing so, always fixated on monsters and horror. He tells me his work used to be very cartoony and colourful, but apparently through discovering my videos, he started reaching more towards realism with a lot more colour, which I'm not gonna lie is pretty awesome to know. He says after his dad, grandfather and girlfriend's mother all died in 1 year, it heavily changed the direction of his art. He kept hearing a lot about heaven and the afterlife from people, and so he started to interpret it in his own little world, which he calls, quote, Hollyvoid, and with that came a whole new style to his art. Adam tells me that the world of Hollyvoid is a purgatory of endless land with worshippers, as well as groups living and surviving, never knowing what might come next. The art he makes is, quote, weirdly comforting and brings him a lot of peace and closure. He makes everything on Procreate on his iPad, but now he says he's starting to practice painting on canvas. Aside from his technical skills when it comes to detail, I think his vision and imagination is beautifully disturbing and chilling. Almost reminiscent of H.R. Giger, but with his own unique style. As amazing as his multicolored pieces are, I also find myself heavily drawn to his more monochrome pieces as well. There's a real coldness and rawness of emotions that emanate from these. I urge you all to check out more of his works via the links you see on screen and in the below description to show him some love. If you too are an artist and you'd like to potentially feature on my channel, I'd love to hear from you. Please send me an email with your artwork and a bit about yourself to blinddweller@gmail.com, or feel free to reach out to me on Instagram. Please be sure to join the Blind Dwellers Art Club on Discord as well, where you can meet like-minded artists, share your art, and ask me a question if you want to. It'd be great to see you there. Finally, as always, a huge, never-ending thank you to all of my patrons and channel members, and here's a special shout out to all of my top-tier donators. Vlad Siv, Mrs. Kelkel, Tyler Butler, Harley Raven, Eric Lamarca, Dave MC, Molitail, Equatamok, Lee Flowers, Calvin Kai, The New Ongoing 24, Akaiza, Large Fatty or Big Chad, Charlie Sancheezy, Paul Perea, Ken B, and Carol H. Also a big thank you to Andrew Yeoman for making the intro and outro music for this video. Thank you again for watching, see you in the next video soon, keep being creative, and bye for now.